Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name's Natalie Higgins. I'm General Counsel for the Equipment Dealers Association. My co-counsel today is Matt Layfield. Matt is a shareholder at Posinelli, a law firm located in St. Louis, Missouri. Matt's practice focuses heavily on agricultural lending practices and disputes. He has been outside counsel to EDA on several issues, and we're happy to have him lead us through the basics when it comes to handling credit card usage and best practices at your dealership. Before we get started, I just want to run through some basic housekeeping. This and other webinars are free services of the Equipment Dealers Association for our members. The Equipment Dealers Association serves its members by advocating in DC and by providing industry relations services such as contract reviews. Here at EDA, we don't charge extra for webinars, but we are funded by your dealer dues. If you haven't done so already, we encourage you to renew your EDA membership to help ensure that EDA can continue to provide these valuable services. For today's webinar, we will take some breaks to respond to questions. As we go through the slides, feel free to type in your questions. We will review them and either answer them live, or in the instance of something that's a very specific question, we might either answer that via message or ask to follow up with you after the webinar. We will also be conducting a few polls along the way today. We encourage you to answer those polls when they appear. And then finally, a web link for the slides and the recording of the webinar will be emailed to you later today or tomorrow. Feel free to use that link to share this information with others at your dealership. For EDA members, be sure and remember that you also have access to EDA's legal hotline available if you do have follow-up questions relating to your dealership practices. That's all I have as far as housekeeping. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Matt for a discussion on credit card usage and best practices.
Thanks, Natalie. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, what I'd like to cover is a 2013 rule change that I think everybody is aware of, but they're probably only aware of it really because their credit cards look different, and maybe you had to get some new items at your dealership in order to process credit cards. But I don't think everybody fully realizes the legal effect of the rule that went into place or went into effect in 2015, but was actually put on the table in 2013. So we'll talk about that rule and what changed as a result of that rule, and then we'll go through some examples and best practices, and as Natalie said, take your questions. So I'd like to start with the prior rules before 2013. And this is what I think most people think of casually when they think about credit card fraud, at least from a merchant standpoint. Prior to 2013, by and large, the majority of credit card fraud was borne, the loss for credit card fraud was borne by the card issuer, the bank, so to speak. As almost everybody on this call probably knows, MasterCard and Visa and Discover and American Express and the others, they are just the card networks that provide the network and processing systems for merchants and banks to use credit cards. Banks are the ones that actually issue the credit cards, and they are the institution behind them. So when credit card fraud would occur, by and large, most of the time, it was borne by the banks on the back end. And even if your community bank offers a credit card, most of the time that while that card has your community bank's imprint on it, the card is actually issued by JP Morgan or Barclays or any of the 5 major money centers based in New York and in Europe. So there are actually less than a dozen different card issuers, so to speak, even though all of us see credit cards with our local bank's name on them. So with that as a bit of a background, you can see why it only took a few of them to put their heads together and decide to make a rule change that affected all of us. So prior to 2013, any fraud that would occur would be borne by the financial institution. This included all types of fraud: stolen credit cards, stolen credit card data that was used online or used on the phone, and most importantly, the rise in counterfeit cards. And counterfeit cards, when I use that term today, what that means is basically the more advanced stealing of credit card information, where they can steal your card information and then imprint it on the magnetic stripe of a credit card. So that's what a counterfeit card means, and that's what this rule change was designed to combat. So what would happen before 2013 is that the only time a retail or merchant would have to pay anything is if there was an egregious case of fraud. You know, somebody like Matt Layfield walking in and using Natalie Higgins' credit card, and it should have been obvious that I'm not a Natalie Higgins. That's the only type of retail liability that would have been borne. And that would have been borne in the way of a chargeback. Chargebacks are when the Visa or MasterCard or American Express system actually debits your payment processing account through your credit card machines, and you now, instead of getting paid, you will have a deficiency in that until you catch back up. So chargebacks were uncommon, but for most retail folks, unlike most of our dealers on the phone today, those chargebacks were to the tune of $100, $500, something nominal like that. So the 2013 rule change that happened was, it's called the EMV chip change. EMV stood for Europay, MasterCard, and Visa. And as you all probably know by looking at your own credit card, they started implementing a chip in there. Now, the chip, when most of us think about credit card fraud, we think about getting your number stolen either online or your actual wallet or purse stolen. Really what the 2013 rule change wanted to do was put the chip in there so the counterfeit card folks couldn't imprint data on a magnetic stripe and have it be used. The counterfeit fraud magnetic stripe imprint caused $8 billion worth of loss in 2015 alone. That doesn't include somebody from Romania stealing your credit card information because you bought something online. That is just the ability for them to steal the magnetic stripe information. So Europay, MasterCard, and Visa got together and implemented the chip. So they put together the rule change in 2013. They gave a 24-month runway for retailers to get updated point of sale or POS system terminals in place. 600 million cards were issued in 2013, 14, and 15 to replace the old cards. So this was an enormous $35 billion cost to change this ecosystem. So in 2015 was the soft deadline for the retailers to have the new POS systems, and 2016, about a year ago, was for ATM companies to have the new chip systems in place. And by October 1st, 2017, you're going to start to see most of your pay-at-the-pump fuel stations swap out your normal pay-at-the-pump software systems, and you're going to see different software systems. In fact, you've probably already seen it in the last 3 to 4 months because their deadline is coming up here in less than a month. So after the 2013 rule change, what happened really was the cause of a shift in liability, a risk shifting, if you will. So what they did was, with the 2013 rule change, they said, here's our new terms of service, everybody. You will have to be able to use chip cards. You will have to have updated software in your point of sale terminals to process the chip cards. And in doing so, if you have the updated technology and there's still a credit card fraud that takes place, we, the card issuer, will still bear the loss. If you don't use the chip process and there's credit card fraud, no matter how the fraud happens, you will bear the risk of loss. And what they estimated in 2013 when they put this together was that this would cause about a 15% shift in merchant liability for the credit card fraud. 15% might not sound a lot, but like I said, there was $8 billion of this type of fraud that the chip card is designed to prevent. That's $750 million. So most retail merchants can't really absorb even anything approaching 1% of that in a 12 calendar month, fiscal year for you all. So that was the design of it. And so on October 1st, the new rules are, if you have a point of sale chip processor and you don't use it and fraud occurs, you will bear the risk of loss. If you have a point of sale terminal with a chip processor, and the customer uses a card that isn't a chip card, meaning their bank or their credit card issuer for some reason hasn't swapped out their old card or given them a new card, or wanted to spend the money on new cards, they will bear the risk of loss. So since you've spent the money on the technology, you will be indemnified, so to speak. So that was the rule change on October 1st, 2 years ago. They basically shifted the risk of loss to whoever has the least updated technology. And by and large, that's the retailers. Only about 50% of retailers have spent the money on the point of sale terminals or the software that's required to be updated. And I'll just kind of tell you, kind of going out of line in this, but only about, of the 50% that have got the point of sale terminals, about another 30% of you all don't have the updated software in your point of sale terminals. And the updated software, obviously, like our computers and all our handheld devices, that's what is needed to make sure that you don't run afoul of any of the new use of service guidelines for your card. So the 2013 rule change, we don't have a lot of data yet from that because it normally takes about 12 months after the end of the year. So I expect at some point here in the next 4 to 5 months, we'll get a lot of data on what happened with the risk of shift, or the risk shift in liability as a result of the October 1, 2015 date. I think, do we have a poll?
Yeah, so poll number 1 for you guys. Go ahead and submit your answers now. All right, a little over half of you guys have responded. I think we're about done collecting. But the question is, does your dealership still accept cards with a magnetic stripe or swipe? 85% said yes.
So, and let me say that accepting a card, you can, when you have chip technology in these cards, in the EMV cards, you can still accept a magnetic stripe, or I'm sorry, a magnetic stripe swipe. The card technology still allows you to do that. When what the terms of service are asking people to do now is insert the card into the chip reader as opposed to simply swiping. So, and that's in what I referenced a minute ago about the updated software. You'll see if you go to the grocery store now, most places, if you try to swipe a chip card, it'll reject it and tell you to insert the card. That means that that retailer has updated software. If you swipe your card and it's a chip card and it accepts it, that means they don't have updated software, because nobody should be allowed to do that anymore. That's obviously, you know, in inserting the chip card, we've all dealt with this. You insert the chip card and, you know, the 15-year-old behind the counter doesn't know how to run things. And so you just get annoyed with it. So you say, I'll just swipe it. So that's what the updated software is designed to try to prevent people from doing, because there's, you know, the counterfeit magnetic stripe imposter card, so to speak, is still $1 billion business, even though I suspect it's less than 8 now. It's easily half that. It's easily 4 billion still. So that's what updated software is designed to do, is to force you not to be able to swipe that anymore. And let me just explain how that even happens. I probably should have done this earlier. The phrase that people use that use imposter cards is called skimming. And you've probably read some stories about this, but if you go to an ATM or a pay at the pump fuel station and you stick your card in and pull it out, there is, and you and I probably can't see this, only someone, you know, trained to look for these things could find it. But what they do is they skim the information off your magnetic stripe. So you do that for 30 days, and then the thief comes back to the gas station, rips out that little skimming device from the pay at the pump slot, and then takes it home to his computer, and then he can print 1,000 cards with 1,000 different people's information, and it can all have his name on the card, but it's tied to your bank account. So anybody who asks for his ID will get his ID, and they'll allow the sale to go through, but it's going to pull from your bank account. And as soon as they figure out that or as soon as you figure out that they've stolen your data and they shut down that card, he'll figure it out because he'll get notice because he's tied into your electronic information. So then he just cuts up that card and moves on to the next one. So that's how they amassed $8 billion worth of fraud in 1 year. And that's why this 2013 rule change came about. So, okay, so let me go through a couple examples here because a lot of people have the EMV chips, they have the point of sale terminals, but a lot of card companies have said, hey, don't worry about it, nothing's really going to change for you, which is not true. So in example one, a customer will come in, buy some equipment from you, and they use the magnetic swipe at your point of sale terminal with the EMV chip technology. So the customer is using a counterfeit or imposter card, and I say known or unknown, it's probably pretty hard for them to use it unknowingly. So it's somebody trying to commit fraud on you. So you accept that swipe card because either you allow the customer to do it or you don't have updated software that requires them to stick the card in the chip reader, and the card processes just fine, and they walk away, load up their equipment, and go. You will be on the hook for that entire amount of fraud. Whatever that equipment cost, down to the dollar. Your use of service guidelines after 2013 and 2015 now say that you bear that entire risk of loss. Before 2013, in this example one, you would not have borne a cent of that loss. That would have been borne by the card issuer. So that's why updating your software is so important. Let's do example number two, the stolen card. This is a far more common thought when we think about credit card fraud is someone just steals your card. So customer comes in, buys a product, uses the chip technology with the stolen card, but they're not who they say they are, and you have updated technology, and so you stick it in the chip reader, it reads it, everything goes through as it should, but they sign their name as Matt Layfield and they're not actually Matt Layfield. But you never asked for their ID, you never confirmed their identity, just a very typical case of stolen credit card information and fraud. You will also bear the entire risk of this. Before 2013, if you didn't check the ID, but you made them sign a receipt and you processed the credit card transaction as normal, you would not have borne that entire risk of that loss. Most terms of service had you bearing about 10% of the loss, if I recall correctly. But one of the things they changed in 2013 was not just forcing everybody to use the chip reader, they're trying to force everybody's behavior to be better at processing credit cards. So when you accept a credit card now, especially everybody on this call, you guys aren't selling things that are $10 a piece. You guys are selling things that are $10,000 and $100,000 and everything in between. So you need to make sure that you ID people because incurring $6,000 worth of loss in any given quarter for you all is something probably very hard to swallow. So example two, under the 2013 rule changes, wow, this is, we'll just call it classic credit card fraud because it occurred before, you will bear the risk of loss now as opposed to before 2013 when you would not have. Example three is the skim card example that I actually just told you about 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. You have a customer that walks in, buys a product, and uses the chip technology. The clerk actually verifies their identity this time, but you have not updated your point of service terminal software. So what you have is a customer using a skim card technology. He's the thief. He's the one who put the skimmer in at the ATM or the fuel pump and imprinted the technology, and now he's buying a $10,000 mower from you. So he comes in and uses that card, and they actually use the chip technology, but your software isn't updated. So the lack of having the updated software is going to cause this transaction to go through. And that means that you're going to end up bearing the risk of loss unfortunately. Even though you have updated technology, you have updated your fraudulent customer is using an updated card with chip technology. What they're actually doing is using this stripe information, and without updated software, the chip can't keep up. So that's why when we get to best practices here, we're going to ask you all to update your software once a quarter, or at the very least once every 6 months. So the goal of 2013 is to get everybody not just to have the updated hardware, but the updated software as well.
So before we get to this next slide, we're going to do our second poll. The question is, does your dealership have training for employees who accept credit card payments to ensure they comply with credit card regulations? Go ahead and submit your answers now. All right, looks like we're pretty much split down the middle. 54% say yes, 50% say no.
And that honestly, guys, is what I kind of expected. And that's not unique to our industry, but that's kind of the standard response across the retail board, is that only about 50% of the folks have what they think is time to be able to get people trained up. So as we go through these best practices, what I'll encourage you to do is just adopt this as something that you have your clerk, whoever does your payment processing, whether it's in your repair shop or your retail counter. If you have two separate ones, make sure that they know exactly what they need to do for every card. And this isn't the same thing as training them to update your software and things like that. That'll be harder to do, and you'll want one point person. But whoever runs a credit card in your shops needs to make sure they know, the 4 to 5 basic things that they should always do. So let me talk about another classic form of fraud, and this is actually one that we had to deal with here a few months ago, unfortunately. And it sounds like something that you don't think people would do, but I think we all would, answer a phone call, sell a mower to somebody, and have them come and pick it up, and not think twice about it if the credit card goes through, and everybody sounds like they know what they're doing. So this is a customer called the dealer, ordered the mower. It was about a $12,000, $10,000 mower, I think, over the phone, and says that his nephew was going to pick it up. Gave him his nephew's name, gave him his name, gave the credit card information, and everything went through. When I think it was like 4 days later, the nephew showed up to pick it up. They got it loaded. He signed the credit card receipt. They never asked for an ID from him, though. Never asked for a copy of the card. The card went through and everything. He just signed the receipt, and they handed back the receipt. So we had a signed receipt, but we never had verification that that card actually existed. So likely what happened was that fraudulent customer obtained that card information through stolen sources online and just placed a phone order. And he actually probably never actually had a card. He probably didn't steal somebody's wallet or purse or anything like that. So that phone order goes through, the guy drives away with it, and you have no idea where they are, how to ever find them to get that property back. So under the previous regime, prior to 2013, again, this is classic credit card fraud, you would not have borne that risk of loss, despite really basic steps here that dealer should have taken to make sure they don't have that loss. They still would have been indemnified in the world pre-2013. After 2013, even though this has nothing to do with EMV chip technology, you will bear 100% of this fraud. You're going to have to eat this. The customer, the actual holder of that credit card, he'll get credited back. The card issuer won't have to bear it because they're going to charge back your card account on your processing system. So that's a tough one to swallow, and an easy one for our dealer that had this happen to him. That's an easy one any of us can see how that would happen. But that's one where we got to follow the steps and make sure that you protect yourself.
So we've got a scheduled break for questions. We've got 2 questions so far. Okay, this one is kind of related to what we were just talking about. Dealers process a lot of credit card transactions over the phone. Any suggestions for minimizing risk for these situations?
Yeah, I do. When you take a phone order, and we'll get to that slide in a little bit too, and we'll talk about it then too. But what you need to do is you need to tell your customer over the phone, unless, and I'm going to caveat here, unless it's a legacy customer that you know by their voice or by their name, et cetera, you need to tell them that that customer needs to present the card and an ID when they pick up the equipment. You shouldn't deliver that equipment. You shouldn't deliver that product without verifying the ID and the card. If you don't know them. If it's a legacy customer, obviously you don't have the same concern. You should be fine doing phone orders unless that legacy customer is asking you to ship that equipment or ship that product somewhere where it doesn't make any sense to you. Then obviously common sense would dictate that you would intervene and call your customer separately and confirm that that's what they want. So, but yeah, if you take a phone order, process the phone credit card, I know you guys do this all the time. It's, in my experience, this is at least 30% of sales. If it's a new customer, you have to tell them that you need to see the card and ID when they show up.
So our second question, do you need to have a copy of ID to prove that we checked the ID?
No, you shouldn't have to. You should need a copy of the card. Let's talk about this in the context of a phone order. In the context of a phone order, if you're going to verify the card when they come in, it's going to be my best practice that you make a copy of the card and a copy of the ID when you do it. So do you need a copy of the ID to push back on a fraud claim from JP Morgan? No. But does it help your cause? Yes, absolutely. If you can prove that you have training in place, meaning that you have a checklist for your clerks to go through when they process credit cards, and that you have a copy of that credit card and a copy of that ID, and it was still a fraudulent transaction, under the rule change, you'll be indemnified completely. There's no chance you'll bear that risk of loss. If you say, well, I know we checked it because Alice said she checked it, but you don't have any proof, it's going to be, the size of the fraud involved and the particular temperament of the person you're dealing with on the other side.
Yeah. Don't you think from a practical perspective from the dealers, this is all going to boil down to, what makes sense in your dealership as far as the cost of the equipment? So if we're talking about, a substantial investment, so the $10,000 mower, something like that, they might want to go ahead and take that extra step and get a copy. Whereas, maybe lower transactions. So if it's a part that's less than $100 or something, I mean, being practical about protecting your dealership and making sure that your policies and procedures really, one, aren't too onerous on your personnel, but to protect you in the instance of that, to make sure that if there is an issue, you're protected. No,
that's actually a really good point. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I should have said. I'm fully well aware of the fact that there's a lot of phone orders that are placed for a part, and the part could be anywhere from $100 to to maybe even $1,000 or something like that, and it's completely impractical for that. And you'll deliver that part to your customer wherever they are, whether they're at their homestead or wherever they are, at their shop, wherever they are. So it's impractical for them to walk in, give you the card and their ID, and make a copy of it, and then you're going to deliver the part. So yeah, there's going to be some common sense involved with you all and what makes sense for your shop. Again, like we talked about a second ago, if you're dealing with a known customer, a known quantity, I would encourage you to, be customer service friendly, because you know them, you know where to find them. But if it's a new person and the part they ordered is, $5,000, maybe that's something you want to think about. If it's a $500 part, maybe the risk of loss isn't big enough, and you don't want to have to risk losing that customer because they'll just call somebody else. because they'll deliver it to them too. So it's no skin off their nose if they order it from another shop. So yeah, I'd encourage you to use common sense, especially when you're talking about parts and lower dollar items. But when you get into the 5 digits for sales, that's the kind of thing that I know if you get, I just know from experience in working with you all that if you get 2 of those in a quarter, that's going to be hard to swallow from a business perspective and a revenue perspective.
Awesome. We've got some really good questions still coming in. I want to remind everybody, I've noticed a couple people pressing the raise your hand button. There's actually a Q&A button at the top left-hand corner of your screen. Click on that to ask a question if you would, please. Okay, so next question. In the scenario where someone picks up equipment, should you take down their license plate number of the truck and or trailer they're using?
I don't think that that's probably necessary unless, as long as they have an ID and as long as you've been able to do the 2 other things, make a copy of their ID and make a copy of the card. Let's assume that question is about a brand new customer and they're hauling away something valuable. You're going to have no better ability to ID them by getting their truck and their license plate number than you are the phone number they left you. You're just not going to be able to track them down. You have more information to give the sheriff or your police department when you file your fraud claim, but it's probably not going to. I don't really recommend that you need to do that for normal and best practices. If something doesn't feel right and the hair stands up on the back of your neck, then by all means. But if you like the example I gave about our member about 3 months ago that had this issue, that probably would have been something they wanted to do. Again, it wouldn't have caused the mower to be returned. There's no way we'd be able to find them. They're somewhere on the East Coast, but it would have been another clue.
Yeah, and to Matt's point, if something doesn't feel right, I mean, at all times you should be following your policies and procedures. You need to be implementing policies and procedures to protect yourself. But in a situation like this where you feel it's sort of, you see these red flags. It's an unknown customer. It's a expensive purchase. It's a five-digit purchase or more. If they're making sure that you strictly comply with your policies and procedures is what's going to provide you with the most protection, because writing down that license plate number, I mean, it's as good as it's gone once it leaves your shop, and what you're really trying to protect is the chargeback. Okay, another great question. Our POS developers have still not updated the software or hardware for EMV cards. What can the dealership do to protect ourselves?
So I'm assuming in that question that you've asked for the updated software and they just haven't rolled it out yet. And of course we're all dealing with IT people, and my apologies to anybody who works in IT who's on the phone right now, but their communication skills are not the world's greatest. So I would say there's a lot of POS terminals that I've seen and dealt with that have automatic pushes to them, automatic software pushes to them, much like devices, your iPads, your laptops, etc. So if you need that updated and they say we don't have any updates, that might actually mean that it's because your POS terminals have them pushed to them. Most POS terminals operate on internet lines rather than phone lines, and those updates happen automatically just like our computers. So if they don't have updates, that's one thing. If they have updates and they're not updating them because they can't get into you to update them, that's another thing. But I would, if you have, there is no good answer as far as if fraud occurs in the interim. Your POS guys haven't updated your terminal, your handheld terminals or your computer terminals, and you get fraud that occurs on you. If the software is there and they haven't updated it, I would expect that you turn around to them and they indemnify you. Under your agreement with them to purchase those terminals, I'm assuming that there's clauses in there that says that they have the obligation to update that terminal promptly. And if you've asked for it and they haven't delivered it, and you end up with a $12,000 hit for a fraud under the 2013 rule change, you should be able to turn right back around and hand them that bill. and they should indemnify you. So, yeah, you're gonna, you know, you will lose in the battle against JP Morgan in that one, but you should win with your terminal hardware manufacturer.
Okay, so back to phone orders. If we have a billing address matched to the shipping, hold on, I'm reading this incorrectly. I think they're asking, are we protected if the billing and shipping address match?
Yeah, I mean, again, it should work. The shipping address and the billing address for the card, that all sounds like it would be fine. But again, what if they call you back and say that, never mind, don't ship it, I'm going to come pick it up? I mean, then water's under the bridge at that point. And again, I mean, this has to be common sense. I doubt there's very few things that are 5 digits and more that you guys can actually ship as opposed to deliver. You know, but if you're talking about actual shipping a part, you know, I think that just has to be something that you're going to have to weigh with respect to if it's a known quantity customer or a brand new one, and what's that dollar amount involved. But, you know, billing addresses and shipping addresses that match are probably a good sign that it's not fraud. Classic fraud would mean that they aren't going to match. Either now or later in the webinar, will we go over liability for online transactions? Well, we can go over it now because the answer is the same as I think it's the 4th slide. Online transactions operate in the same manner because most of you, let me take a step back. A lot of you probably have online shops. Online shops have a couple different options for processing cards. You can use third parties, or a lot of your POS terminal folks have integrated systems that you can use for your online shops. So it kind of depends on your terms of service with that individual, but the same rules apply as far as 2013 goes. Your interface has to capture all the information that you would otherwise capture on the phone. You need to get, obviously, the number. You need to be able to capture the 3-digit security card. And then again, what I'm going to say when we get to that slide, and I'll tell you now as well, if this is something that they're picking up because it's such a high dollar amount or it's such a just physically big piece of equipment or part, you should have in your boilerplate on your online store that they need to present the card and the ID when they come pick it up. If it's small enough that it can ship, then I think common sense would dictate that you don't want to weigh down your customer service process and your customer service delivery with making them come in and prove they are who they are before you ship that part. But if it's big enough that they're going to buy online and pick up, you should be wary of if they can't produce a card and an ID to come do that. If they're going to say that their nephew, you know, Jesse Kelly is going to show up and pick it up, but their name is Charles Kelly and they're ordering it, that's what you need to be wary of.
Excellent. Okay, this is our last question for right now. RBS World Pay, which I assume is the POS software, doesn't allow a debit card to be used as a non-PIN credit unless it is swiped. Who is responsible in that situation?
The person responsible is the retail person there, because, and I understand why, what the issue is, because I do the same thing. I can't stand putting in my PIN and I forget it all the time, actually. So I just always want to swipe my card as a credit card and process it as a credit card, and the retailer wants you to use a PIN. The PIN is it's called second step authentication. And so you as the retailer need to ask them to put in their PIN, and that's kind of the updated software that we talked about a second ago as well. Traditional debit cards that don't have the chip that you try to swipe, updated software is rolling out that is starting to not allow you to do that anymore. So you have to remember your PIN to use it as a debit card, because that forces people to do the second step authentication. And so even if you're dealing with somebody doing a counterfeit card with stolen magnetic stripe information, the 4-digit PIN isn't on that magnetic stripe information. So that's why they're updating their POS terminals to force you to do that. So to me, and when we get to best practices and what you should all encourage your retail clerks to do, if it doesn't have a chip and they want to use it and they want to use the card as a swipe, I would make them use it as a 4-digit PIN, because that's going to protect you from the counterfeit cards that we talked about earlier.
Awesome. Well, that's a great question and answer session. And we'll carry on. If you have more questions, go ahead and just ask them and we'll answer. We'll take another break for questions later.
Okay. And so we're going to go into our best practices that we just were kind of talking about with our questions. So,
are you ready for a poll here?
I think maybe poll 3.
Poll number 3. Okay, guys. Poll number 3. Does your dealership accept credit cards over the phone?
Well, not surprisingly, about 93% of the participants said that, yes, we do take orders over the phone. I know that's common practice, especially behind the parts counter. Farmers calling in, consumers calling in the case of outdoor power dealerships. So not surprising.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to have a takeaway today that you know, EDA's partner counsel here and Matt Layfield tell you that you should not accept phone orders. I absolutely think you do, and you have to. I mean, it's just a basic fact of how your industry runs. But in the examples that Natalie and I deal with time and time again, there's just some real basic steps that need to be followed to protect yourselves. And further, the examples that we're seeing, folks don't know that the risk shifting that happened in 2013 means if you fail to take one of these steps and have somebody prove who they are, who they say they are, now you start to bear the entire risk of loss. And before 2013, that just wasn't the case. You could make a mistake and you could get away with it. It was fine. Not fine, but it was $8 billion worth of not fine. And that's why the credit card companies, or the card issuers, I should say, changed course. So with that, let's talk about our best practices. And the easiest, lowest hanging fruit is the in-store processing. Kind of what I've talked about a few different times. I think as part of your quarterly best practices, you should update your POS terminals. If it's not done automatically, the question we had earlier talked about our reference that they don't have updates. And again, make sure that your updates aren't actually being pushed automatically to your terminals. If they are, awesome. If they're not, make sure you make a habit of calling your hardware folks or having your IT people call the IT people for your POS manufacturer and make sure everything's updated so you can check that box. That's good, just a good practice to ensure that you're covering yourself. All your in-store purchases should be used with an EMV chip card. EMV chip cards are basically the only card out there anymore. Very few cards don't have the chip. So even though some people don't like to use the chip processor because it's obnoxious and they mess it up, or they don't want to use their PIN, or et cetera, they just want to swipe, your new practices should require all your customers to use the chip technology. Even if it's inconvenient, I mean, honestly, it's another 30 seconds for them to use it, so it's not a big deal. Let me talk about the $50 threshold too. A lot of people, if you read about this stuff online, you'll say, hey, retailers, don't worry about this stuff so much because there's a $50 threshold that's all the liability you have to bear. And you will see if you go to the grocery store, if you go to pick your retail place where you buy things that generally are under $50, that's why you don't have to sign. If you stick your chip card in there, you don't have to sign a receipt, you don't have to enter a PIN, and you just get your goods and you go on your merry way. That's because it's a $50 threshold. The card, not every card's the same. $50 is the most common one. I think Discover's 100. But nonetheless, I still don't be confused just because you go to a retail place and they don't make you sign and they don't make you authenticate your card and you say, well, Layfield must have been full of it because I don't have to do any of this stuff here. It's because you're dealing with $50 items. In the terms of service, you have that carve out in the 2013 updates and the 2015 updates. So that's why nobody has to sign anymore for $50 and you used to 5 years ago. And my other best practice is that when you actually do make a copy of the card, make a copy of the ID, you guys should keep that in your customer file for 90 days. Most billing time periods are 30-day billing time periods. However, if you've ever had the unfortunate circumstance to have to deal with credit card companies in a legal setting, you'll find out that if you actually charge something on the 25th day of a business cycle, it won't show up in a billing cycle for 45 days because there's a grace period at the end of most billing cycles on credit cards. So that's why 60 days is probably good enough, but I would recommend everybody keep those IDs in receipt copies for 90 days. Now, frankly, you're going to make copies of them, stick them in a customer file, and you'll probably hold on to them for a year, most likely, until you clean out your files from that last year. But I would recommend that you keep those two pieces of information for 90 days, because that you will know at that point if fraud occurred or not.
All right, guys, poll number 4 coming your way. We touched on this a little bit. Does your dealership accept cards over the internet?
Well, that's interesting. A majority do not accept credit cards over the internet. Probably a testament to the fact that most of the equipment industry is still largely a face-to-face business at this point. But I'm sure that, you know, as things progress, especially on the OP side, we're seeing more and more of the consumers being able to purchase online.
Let's skip ahead to the online processing since we just talked about that. And we kind of talked about it. Somebody asked a question about this, I think, and we've kind of covered this, but let me do it again quickly. Most of your online interfaces are going to capture all the information that you're seeing on this slide. 16-digit card number, expiration date, the 3 to 4 digit security card on the back. Obviously shipping and billing, et cetera, addresses. So that part I'm not too worried about because most people have that covered. What I do want you to look at if on your online shop, if you do accept cards online, is consider adding boilerplate that says something along the lines that it's subject to dealer's discretion to require copy of card and verification of identification at time of pickup of equipment or pickup of product. That's the kind of thing that you want to have on there as a boilerplate or some version thereof that you see that I have written on here, a copy of the customer's ID and a copy of the card. Just because the online fraud is, as you probably all know, it's the easiest one for everybody to commit. It's very easy for a thief to order stuff online, pick it up, or have it shipped. Most of the stuff is picked up. You know, if you ship stuff to stores right now, any normal retail store, Walmart, you know, any of the places, very few of them, even though they say, well, check your ID, they don't check your ID. You can just walk in, say who you are, pick it up, just show them a copy of the receipt that you got from in your email inbox when you bought it. So that isn't going to discourage any thief. So I encourage you to put that boilerplate line that the customer has to show the card and ID matching to pick up the equipment. Obviously, just like we talked about before with the phone orders, if this is something that you normally ship or if this is something that you normally deliver and this is not customer service friendly for that particular customer or your shop, to make them come in and show an ID and a card, then don't do it. You know, but that has to be a business judgment call for you. If it's a $500 item, that's probably something that you can absorb and, you know, learn your lesson with. If it's a $5,000 item, it's different. But kind of looks like not everybody processes maybe that big of items online anyway. So yeah, let's go back and talk about the phones for a second. So this was the example that we talked about a couple different times here. Phone processing, and we've talked about it via the question, so I don't want to harp on it too much. But again, I know phones are an important part of your business. It's part of your commercial services you provide your customers. Please don't read this or hear this and have it be interpreted as I'm telling you to stop taking phone orders. Take your phone orders. Have a process in place. You guys know your shops obviously better than I. You know the percentage of your products that get sold via phone orders that are, you know, $500 and up and $400 and down. So you make the call on what makes sense for you, but just know that phone orders that you take and that you process and that you ship or deliver, if that ends up being fraudulent and you can't produce a copy of that card or a copy of that ID, you're probably going to lose in a fight with a card issuer. Those are the examples that Natalie and I have seen. We got to be able to actually prove that the person who ordered it is in fact the person who owns the card. The only way to do that is to verify both cards, the identification card and the credit card. So, but again, make it make business sense for you. So, and I've hinted at this over and over again, but let's talk about legacy customers for a second. Kind of in line with what I just said, when you have legacy customers or offshoots of legacy customers, please don't hear this today and have it be interpreted as me telling you to make their life harder. If you've dealt with somebody for 30 years and you know them and you know their kids and you know their relatives, and please don't force them to jump through hoops, because I don't want you to lose a customer because of that. However, don't have the wool pulled over your eyes that not all the offspring of your legacy customers are fine, upstanding citizens. Some of them make bad decisions. Some of them run with bad people. And I think we probably all have seen and heard of examples of that. So I just wanted to put this slide in here really to highlight the vigilance and common sense. Treat your legacy customers as you deem appropriate to keep their business, but also it's been my experience that if something doesn't seem right or smell right and you pick up the phone and call maybe the uncle or the nephew or the parent of that person who didn't seem right, you'll probably get it figured out before anybody has risk of loss, either the customer or you. So I encourage you to employ you know, some customer service touch and feel on that one.
We do not have any other questions right now, so we will continue on.
Let me take a second here before I talk about allegation of fraud and talk about a slide that I should have put in here, but for some reason didn't. It's probably one of the ones I deleted on accident. So let me deal with data breaches. Data breaches are in the news about every other day. Equifax is probably going to end up having to shut down because of their data breach that just occurred. So we all know they happen. They happen to everybody from Target to Equifax, who's charged with keeping your identities safe, and everybody in between. So if there's a data breach that happens to a data breach that happens to JP Morgan Chase, and your customer thinks that data breach, was compromised their card that they have that's been swiped at your terminal. I just want to advise you kind of the basic steps. When data breaches happen, they don't happen at the retail level, by and large. They happen on the cloud. They happen in servers, in server warehouses. Data breaches are probably not in your individual servers in your individual shops. So if there's a JP Morgan data breach, very low chance it's backdoor through your server and you have something to worry about. Now, when it does happen to JP Morgan or Target or whomever, and a customer asks you a question, well, should I keep using this card or are you compromised? The answer is no. You're not compromised at all. Your terminals are updated. When data breaches happen, there's actually rules and regs now that the federal government has promulgated that they're required to advise people almost immediately within about 5 business days, and software gets updated from that point going forward. So that's supposed to contain that data breach. That's why when Target, I think it was like 2 years ago, had 100 million cards compromised from a data breach, there's very few people who actually had loss because of it. And that's because they have the ability to expand that net really quickly. And if there's purchases that happen on people's cards that don't look right, like somebody, trying to charge Matt Layfield's card in New Mexico for, a roll of toilet paper or something, they would not process that charge without calling me first, because I'm just not normally in New Mexico. So if customers get worried about data breaches, if you get worried about data breaches that aren't yours, just take a deep breath. They're probably not going to affect you too much. Now, again, if you experience a data breach, that's dealt with in your terms of service for your credit card processing. I think you guys probably know how to handle that, and if you don't, I encourage you to look at your terms of service. Basically, you need to let your credit card processor know immediately if you have a breach of your card information, because it's probably going to come in through your point of service terminals. So that's who you need to let know. All right, let me talk about when you get a fraud allegation, because this is actually where the rubber meets the road for most of you. You might actually not know a darn thing until the card issuer comes back and sends you something in the mail. When you first get told about the fraud claim, the first thing I think you should do is figure out where that equipment went. If it was delivered, figure out where it was delivered to, and see if you can figure out a way to put eyes on it or confirm its location. Now, if it's true fraud and somebody took it, they're not going to answer your phone call. They're not going to say, yeah, I have that. So they're probably gone and probably have a new phone number. So, but the first thing I would like you to do is try to figure out where that equipment is or where it was delivered to. Even if you can't put eyes on it, figure out where it went so you can start the next steps when you need to. So, second thing you need to do is figure out what the time deadline is to respond. You basically waive rights if you don't respond in a timely manner. That is in your terms of service guidelines with the card issuer. You have to respond timely, otherwise you just don't have any rights. They give you, I think, like 3 weeks to respond. Shouldn't be that hard to do. And you should, hopefully, if we're following the best practices, you should have everything you need. You should have a signed receipt. You should have a copy of the ID, if it was a phone order, and a copy of the card if it was a phone order. If it was an in-person order, a copy of the receipt, should be had. And the copy of the receipt will tell you if it was EMV chip technology or not. So if you have all those things, nothing changes from the 2013 rules. You're not going to be on the hook. You're fully indemnified. All you got to do is respond timely. If you don't respond timely, even if you're in the right, you might end up being in the wrong. They might try to just stick it to you anyway, because they can, basically, under your contract. So make sure that you respond timely. That's the biggest thing. And obviously, as we've talked about, use your best practices and have your documents ready to go so you can respond. That's kind of why I said the 90 days to hold on to those things, because you should know within 90 days if there's been a fraudulent claim against one of your sales. When customers allege fraud, that's something that, believe it or not, happens in your industry a heck of a lot more than you would think, meaning that the customer tells you that, hey, somebody bought something at your place and it wasn't me, as opposed to the card issuer coming to you. So just because they feel more comfortable doing that. the first thing you need to do is tell that person to call their card issuer, because nothing happens until the person who issues the card puts a fraud alert on the card. So that card will keep being used over and over again. You're not responsible. Just because the product or the equipment was bought at your shop doesn't mean you hold responsibility for doing what the customer should do. So tell the customer to call the card issuer, and they can call the police and make a claim for fraud or theft. So and the next step should be the same thing as before. Figure out if you can identify where that equipment went. Obviously, most likely it's long gone, but there are some rare events where very unintelligent criminals use fraudulent cards, get a piece of equipment, and they're still just 12 miles away working. So you can figure out where that stuff is and try to get a hold of it via the police or sheriff. I would start getting your documents together too if the customer says something, because it's likely the card issuer is going to issue a fraud claim at some point. So get your receipts and documents all lined up and keep track of the complaint. So, and again, when you get that complaint from the card issuer, respond timely, guys. Don't let that time deadline slip away.
It's probably best for dealers, when you say, Matt, to designate someone who is responsible for handling these types of issues, because it is a time crunch, and if this happens in the middle of harvest or the middle of planting season, or if you're an OPE dealer in the middle of the summer when you're running ragged, having one person to make sure that this is their priority would be very beneficial, I think, to all dealerships. Yeah,
I mean, that's a very good point. It should be whoever your shop manager is, whoever's in charge of the retail side of it. I'm not going to call it an intricate process, but it's a detailed process. So you want somebody who has a good handle on the details, who you trust to run it. So yeah, you should have a point person in every place, because basically all fraud claims are the same as far as response. There's nothing unique about them. Every single one of them have deadlines, need documents, require things to be filled out. Once you've done one of them, you can basically copy and paste, for lack of a better term, your response to any subsequent ones. So it's a good idea to have a point person to do that. Specifically, although no one has time to deal with this, it's got to be a priority for someone to make time to deal with it. So I would encourage you not to roll that particular ball downhill. Give a manager or a foreman or somebody like that the responsibility.
All right, time for our last chance at questions. We've got a few. First question is, how do they normally notify us? By mail? I'm not, who they're talking about. Yeah, fraud.
The card issuer, and this seems so antiquated, but it is how they do it. But they do. They notify you by mail. That's the first time you're going to notice it. They have no other means of really telling you, because they have documents that you need to fill out and sign. And you would think that you'd have an email contact, but as we all know, people move around in the world, and so email is not a reliable way to send this stuff. So yeah, you'll find out by mail.
Okay, next question. Can signed credit card receipts be saved electronically, and is it okay to not keep the original?
Yes, that's fine, because you're not providing an original when you send in your fraud packet, is what they call it. So, because when you send in your fraud packet, that goes to an intake person's desk at JP Morgan. They scan it all in and send it to the claim analyst. Nobody ever sees the original. So yeah, if you want to, make a copy, store it in your server, and just make sure you back up your server, but store it in your server, and you can throw away the paper. You don't have to hold on to the paper. You just have to have an accessible copy somewhere.
In keeping a copy of a credit card in a customer file, is this still PCI compliant?
That's a good question. You have, and there's a threshold. So what PCI compliant refers to is basically that you have to. Well, I'll talk about it from the financial institution world, which is really what I know best. What you need to do is you need to have authenticated access to that type of information. So a lot of times this is why when you go to, for example, like my law firm, you need a swipe card to get in because we have, customers and clients' credit card numbers in paper in files. So that's what we're worried about there. That's a good point because I think keeping the paper receipt, if you don't have a way to electronically track who comes in and out of your shop, that might be a bit of a problem. So that might be something that you might want to think about putting that on the cloud or on the server, so to speak. If you have electronic swipe cards, you're probably PCI compliant already, not knowing what everybody's shop exactly looks like. But if you're a traditional, lock and key kind of person, probably not PCI compliant. You probably need to figure out a way to make a copy of that receipt and store it electronically so you can monitor who would have access to it, because obviously that would be an electronic imprint and trail. It's a good question.
And what about card numbers stored in our POS business system? Do we need to delete these?
No, again, same kind of concept that I just touched on. You have electronic imprint of the ability to access that stuff. So you should be fine on that regard.
So last question we have right now, we have had issues not knowing about a fraud request until we got charged back. At what point, who can we contact?
Okay, so there are some card issuers that are very aggressive with the chargeback. They will do the chargeback to protect themselves, but you'll still get a fraud packet in the mail. In fact, I think that's what happened to our customer or our member earlier this summer. So when you get the chargeback, you should obviously get on the horn with them and get you a fraud packet, because nothing happens until they get that fraud packet back. But yeah, that's not uncommon for that to be your first recognition of it, because obviously the flow is, the customer tells the card issuer, hey, this is fraud. I never bought that. Why would I ever buy that, kind of thing? And then they do a 2-day investigation. They charge it back to you and send you the fraud packet. What they're trying to do is to protect their ability to recover that money in the event that they're not the one that should be held liable. So yeah, if that's how you find out about it, get on the horn with them and get your fraud packet and get it sent back. And the other thing I'll say is fraud packets look like junk mail. Like when they come in, there's nothing special about them. They don't say, attention. They don't come in like red envelopes or anything. They literally look like junk mail. So
Don't miss out, yeah.
Yeah, don't miss them.
And if you do get a fraud packet and you need guidance, you need additional assistance, EDA members do have access to the legal hotline. You can chat with me, you can chat with Matt about something, any questions that you might have, and we can help you out with respect to that. So we don't have any more questions at this time. So with that, we'll wrap up the webinar. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.